I'd now like to introduce you to our panelists for today. So our first panelist for this discussion is Mahinda Siriwardena, who has been the Secretary to the Treasury and the Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policies since 2022. At present, he serves as a member of the Finance Commission, a member of the Colombo Port City Economic Commission, and is also the chairman of the Sustainable Development Council. Welcome, Mr. Siriwardena. An opposition MP for the Colombo district, Dr. Harsha de Silva, is also the chairman of the Committee on Public Finance. Beginning his professional career as a chief economist and treasurer at a leading Sri Lankan bank, Dr. Harsha also has experience working in over 20 countries as an international consultant for the World Bank, ADB, and UNDP. Welcome, Dr. Harsha. A former department director of the IMF, Dr. Sharmini Cooray is a member of the Presidential Advisory Group on Multilateral Engagement and Debt Sustainability, advising the government of Sri Lanka. Welcome, Dr. Cooray. And finally, our moderator for this panel is none other than Dr. Roshan, a former director of the Central Bank and a senior research fellow at the Advocata Institute. Over to you, Dr. Roshan.
Thank you and welcome to all the panelists. I think just to cut to the chase, basically fiscal indiscipline over several decades has arguably been the primary cause of the economic and debt crisis that Sri Lanka has faced. So although the IMF program has to some degree brought us some fiscal discipline, I think the question is, what does it take or what is needed for long-term fiscal sustainability? We have a panel of experts who have very long and varied experience in this area, and it is my privilege to be able to ask them some questions so that they can share their thoughts on what they think is required to ensure good governance over fiscal policy so that the country can avoid another crisis. Just to set the sort of the format for this panel discussion, I will first ask some introductory questions just to set the context, although Yasmin has done a great job in that. But basically to ask our panelists what are the challenges they see in terms of ensuring this long-term fiscal sustainability. And then I will put a few more questions. And I encourage or invite the panelists to even respond or react to what your fellow panelists, the responses to the fellow panelists. And then I will open the questions to the House. So just to start, let me ask ST. The last couple of years have been challenging ones, especially on the fiscal side. That is probably an understatement. As the government has sought to correct the past excesses on the fiscal and adhere to some very strict fiscal targets set under the IMF program. As a Secretary Treasury through most of this process, what are the challenges you have faced in delivering on these very ambitious targets?
Thank you, Roshan. First of all, I should thank Advocata Institute and the organizers of this, very important seminar for inviting me to basically share some of my thoughts in this very valuable topic that you are discussing. And also I'm very happy that I'm with a panel with Dr. Harsha as well. And Sharmini is also online, I can see. Of course, in fact, a very, very pertinent question, that you posed on me. In fact, before talk this, recent sort of developments, I think if I am to talk about this, I should go back to April 8th, 2022, where I assumed the duties as the Finance Secretary. At that time, country was in chaos, and in the Treasury also there were a lot of issues, and virtually Treasury was burning at that time. There were no rupees, no dollars in insufficient quantities to make day-to-day payments. So you can imagine the sort of situation at that time. In fact, if you see the financial requirement that time, day-to-day operation, day-to-day finance payments were not able to pay. For example, your your interest payments and also salary bill exceeded your revenue. So, and at the same time, you know, your monetary financing from central bank exceeded 2 trillion, and you're not getting any, you know, foreign financing because of your, you know, rating downgrade and so on and so forth. And at the same time, you know, you had an overdraft of around above 900 billion, and there were unpaid bills of around 180 billion. So that's the sort of situation that we started at that time. But, you know, that needed decisive actions, especially within a very short period of time, because, you know, we went to the IMF and there were some, you know, specific, you know, targets to be achieved. If you had to basically achieve those targets, you had to take, you know, some, you know, concerted as well as tough decisions. Of course, as we all know, we took a number of decisions and we implemented those, and those are very tough decisions which had, you know, implication on almost everyone in the society, particularly the, you know, the people of this country, and we are very much thankful for the people and also everyone who supported these, you know, policies to achieve, you know, whatever the things we are having today. So that's the sort of broader comment I want to make when I try to, you know, respond to your question. And at the same time, you know, biggest challenge, as I mentioned, was the, you know, how you basically shift from a position of extreme fiscal weakness to a sort of a moderate level. So that was the very, very difficult question. And at the same time, you know, as I mentioned, you know, people were going through very difficult hardships. And then the primary balance was, you know, negative 5.7% of GDP, and we had to, you know, increase it to 2.3% of GDP surplus by within maybe 2015, so 2025. So that was the very difficult target that we had. And at the same time, you know, we did not have a choice of having a gradual process of adjustment. What we had to, you know, take, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we had to have some rapid, you know, adjustment to achieve this target. So that was one of the critical areas that we had to edit. And then, you know, here I want to make a comment, because we missed a lot of opportunities that we had in the past. Because if we sort of, you know, went to an IMF program before, even at least by mid 2021, we should have, you know, avoided many of these, you know, issues that we faced in 2022 April. Because of that reason, we had to, you know, have, you know, a lot of, you know, difficulties. So that's my assessment in this case. And then when we went to the IMF in a, you know, relatively very weak situation, with a very weak situation. But if you basically were able to go to the IMF with a relative strength, you could have, you know, negotiated in a better way. So that also I had to basically share with you. But somehow we came to this program, and we had a lot of, you know, difficult targets to be achieved, and at the same time, we implemented all this on a more concerted basis. And also the support that we got, you know, from various, you know, areas, including the Parliament and also the Harsha's committee, was very instrumental in, you know, getting where we are today, right now. And at the same time, you know, inflation was at that time, you know, about 70%, and food inflation was about 95%. So the government implemented the concerted, as I mentioned, effort to, you know, overcome all these situations. Say, from the central bank side, they came up with the monetary policy, and from the government side, we basically, you know, wanted to increase the taxes and, you know, achieve this, you know, deficit reduction part. So then we were able to, you know, achieve by now all these, you know, expected, you know, outcomes to a considerable extent. But I would like to share with you that, you know, this some of the monetary policy, you know, policies that we took has obviously an impact on the interest payments of the government. Right now, what we are having in our budget is the sort of, you know, outcome of some of those policies, and also some of the uncertainties that we saw at that time. So that also, you know, one of the challenges, even right now, we have been able to face that, but even right now, it remains as one of the key challenges. So at the same time, you know, we wanted to design some of these policies to basically ensure that the poor and the vulnerable are not affected. That's also very important. And that's why, you know, government came up with the, you know, some of the schemes to basically ensure that, you know, the impact of the crisis itself, and also the impact of the reforms that we are implementing are basically, you know, sort of minimized to the poor and the vulnerable people, which is very important to us. So those are the, you know, key areas that we had to, you know, keep in our mind, and somehow we took tough decisions, not only from the revenue side, but from the expenditure side as well. If you see the circulars that we issued from the beginning, I still remember the very first circular that we issued somewhere in April 26, 2022, restricting number of, expenditure items, that has, paid positively. And over last 2 years, I observed that, most of the line ministers are now, falling in line with those of, requirements. So, our expectation was to basically, inculcate disciplined fiscal management in the government machinery. So, to me, we went to this crisis because we did not have this fiscal discipline. This fiscal indiscipline was the root cause of this crisis. So, if you have to basically address this crisis, you have to basically address the root cause that you have. That's what we are doing right now. And it's a tough task, lot more done. We will discuss going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, STN. I think we've heard what the Ministry of Finance and particularly the technocrats have had to do to get to this, to bring us to where we are now from where we were. But we always hear, Dr. Harsha, we always hear that Parliament, where the Parliament has overall responsibility for public finance. And one of the key pillars, I think, of this fiscal governance has been, over a long period of time, the parliamentary committees. And I think you've been in Parliament many years, you've been served on several of these committees, and now you're in the Committee on Public Finance. What has been your experience in these committees, and how effective have they been really in holding governments accountable on fiscal matters, and what are the challenges you see?
Thank you, Roshan. First of all, you see, politicians try to take credit for how things have turned out. Some politicians want to hit at them and say how bad it has become. But the unsung heroes are the technocrats behind these politicians. And I would like to appreciate the great effort by the Secretary of the Treasury in actually implementing the tough reforms he had to. So I would like everyone to sort of appreciate. Right? And he's gone through a really tough time. People taking him to court, accusing him of various things, and so on. So we never appreciate the people really behind the scene. Having said that, I don't agree with everything that the Secretary mentioned here. Taxing people is easy, and what really happens is, the lives of those people have really gone from the frying pan to the fire. The poverty has increased from 3 million to 7 million and so on. I don't want to get into that now. I want to park it there because otherwise I'll be accused of supporting everything that has happened. But you asked me about the committee. We took a decision that this country had to go through these reforms. The committee had to support the reforms. Even though we don't necessarily agree with everything, with the politics of what the government is trying to do, but we all understood, we realized that it was fiscal indiscipline that got us here. Yes, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa's mispolicy, triggered the collapse. But we had got to a point where unless those in power were really able to navigate through a very sort of a narrow path, we would fall off the cliff, which is what happened. Now in that, like you said, the Parliament has full control over public finance under Article 148 of the Constitution. So the government can propose any type of legislation, but it has to finally be approved in Parliament. So my committee has the unique authority in actually approving or not the legislation that comes to our committee. While Honorable Mahinda Dissanayake is here, he is in our committee. While it is not absolutely necessary for the approval of the Committee on Public Finance the approval is not necessary to get Parliament to vote on it, because you can do it by suspending standing orders. We haven't seen that. So there has been consensus in the committee for the type of reforms that had to go through. So there, the issues that I see, having been in this committee and having been sacked twice and reappointed twice, I might get sacked again if I do things that, not necessarily to your liking, Mr. Secretary, or maybe your boss, Mr. Secretary. We need to bring more transparency into these committees. Now, never was a committee on public finance open to the public. People didn't even know it existed. So it was my decision as the chairman to open it out to the public. It is a prerogative of the chair to do that. So what has now happened is people realize, look, it's not just the chamber that MPs are yelling at each other in bad language, but a lot goes on in these committees, right? And so therefore, by opening it to the public, we release the videos unedited to the media, unless, of course, we do something in camera, which is of sensitive nature. Then those people who are interested in the topic can take it and comment on it, and social media has its own life on these videos and so on. The other thing is, we sometimes need to be able to go beyond just a talk shop, right? If I go beyond our committee, look at the Committee on Public Enterprise or the COPA, things get highlighted in those committees. It's a media show. After that, what happens, right? There is no follow-up. We have wanted the AG to be present so that the evidence can be used in a court of law. So that needs approval in Parliament by amending the standing orders. Unfortunately, the government has been blocking that. So if the government actually wants to do it, to give more power, give more teeth to the committees, it can do it, right? So there has to be a sort of a working together between and among committees and government. So I think those are my initial thoughts on your question, Roshan.
Thank you, and I think I'm going to take these up in the follow-up questions. But before that, I'll turn to Sharmini and sort of change track a bit and take up one thing that Harsha said about the high level of taxation and its impact on people. I think one of the main issues on the fiscal side was this low tax collection, actually. In your opinion, what are the challenges that Sri Lanka faces in trying to raise this? And I think Harsha brought up some of the issues, but really what are the fundamental issues that Sri Lanka faces in terms of raising the taxes to a level where we can have a more sustainable fiscal situation?
Thank you. Thank you for Roshan and to Advocata for inviting me to participate in this channel. Let me put the tax issue in context, okay? And I need a minute to do that because people blame taxes when I think the real issue was that we had inflation of 70%, which wiped out people's real incomes. So on the taxes itself, let me put a number in front of you. If after debt restructuring, Sri Lanka's tax burden, the IMF projects, the interest burden, that is the interest on our debt, will be above 6% of GDP in 2028. We need a tax ratio of at least 14% of GDP because even then, after debt restructuring in the year 2028, we will be spending 45% of our tax revenue on interest payments. So, and that's the highest in the world, by the way. And so I think it's important to understand that we need at least 14%, and we are now at about 9.5%. right? And we need to get there because otherwise we are not fiscally sustainable. Now, the issue, as Harsha said, is the equity and other issues that come with how to raise the taxes properly. So 14% is a minimum. And some people say, well, that shouldn't be too difficult. We used to be at 19% of GDP way back in the 1990s. But unfortunately, we can't go back to that model. And the reason is that a lot of that depended on import duties, right? A lot of our taxes came from import duties at the time. But if we rely on import duties, it has other problems. Consumers, I mean, poor people, of course, get affected by the duties because the prices of goods rise. And also, and not just imported goods, import competing goods, because import duties protect domestic producers. So our people are paying higher prices than they need to. The other thing is that import duties also make, high import duties make the development part more inward looking, and it's very damaging. It's something we cannot sustain. This is what has happened to us. Our previous growth path was not sustainable. Now, there is some good news, and I would say that the tax reforms of the last year and a half, which I think were essential and difficult but essential, are yielding results. Our tax ratio has gone from a low of 7.5% to something like 9.5% today. And we have to get to 14 by year 2025, 26, 14% of GDP. So how are we going to do this? I know it is going to be challenging. So what are the challenges that we need to face and focus on in the coming years, as you asked? First, we need to rely less on indirect taxes. Indirect taxes burden poor people. Right now, Sri Lanka has a very high ratio of indirect taxation, and the indirect things like import duties, as I mentioned, are very damaging to the type of outward-looking growth we need. And we need to lower taxes from international trade, which are run at about, I think, 13% of GDP today. 13% of total revenue today, not GDP, but 13% of total revenue, to something in the order of 4 or 5% of revenue, to be comparable with countries like Thailand and India, with whom we are competing, right? So that tells you how much we need to rely less on things like import duties. However, to rely less on import duties, we need to collect more direct taxes. And so this, I think, is the most critical challenge, is tax administration. I would argue that the way to raise revenue is, at this point, is not through higher tax rates, but through better tax administration and by changing the structure of the taxation, as I just described. So, but we have a very weak tax administration. The diagnostic report was scathing about the level of corruption and lack of investment in human capital, in digital systems, in our tax revenue agencies. Now, this is partly because historically we've relied on import duties, excise duties, turnover taxes, things that are relatively straightforward to apply rather than people's income. But it's also, I think, frankly, deliberately undermining our tax collection authorities by underinvesting, by leaving them open to corruption. I think this is pretty deliberate, because then rich people don't have to pay as much taxes because they're the ones who have to pay more direct taxes. So I think the IMF has estimated that the shortfall in taxes in 2023 was more than 50% of that was due to poor tax administration. So that they've analyzed that, and that's challenge that we have, I think, is to broaden the tax base and to get more taxpayers into the system, right? So make our tax system fair and efficient and not distortionary, or least distortionary as possible. And for that, we need to have taxes that are easy to administer, that are simple, uniform, sort of standard rates. Right now we tax income from capital less than income from labor. So the structure, of how we collect the direct taxes has to change. And I would agree with Harsha, the burden falls too much on people lower, even though only the top 15% is in the tax bracket of income earners, still the very rich and the super rich are not paying their fair share of taxes. So tax exemptions in particular need to be eliminated, because tax exemptions are really creating holes in our tax base. And they primarily benefit the rich. So I would say, these are some of the critical challenges we face, and I hope we can discuss a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharmini, and I think there's a lot to unpack there, and we'll come back to that. But I want to go back to you, ST. You talked a lot about the reforms that had already been done and what you had done and your team has done in the Ministry of Finance. The thing is, in the past, we've had, periods where we've had very good policies being implemented, but then they can get reversed very quickly, depending on who's there. So you're not going to be there all the time. But we want to ensure that these kind of reforms continue and these kind of policies continue across governments, across bureaucrats, who are in this position. So I think that's part of the whole IMF's diagnostic report, is to set in place these institutional frameworks. And one of the things I think is this Public Financial Management Act. Now, I think it was supposed to be enacted by February 2023. There is a delay, and maybe you can talk to that. But what are the main provisions in that act to make this public finance management have a more long-term orientation rather than these, short-term cycles that we have, which are sort of linked with the political cycle? So if you can talk to that and explain the provisions as well as how this will improve governance, fiscal governance.
No, thank you, Roshan. It's a very valid question. In fact, that is what is needed. For example, this is not a matter of a person or a group of people or one government. We have been doing that in the past, frequently changing, without giving any, specific or proper signals to the community, investors, international organizations, rating agencies. We have been basically playing with this fiscal policy. That I don't fear to say that, because that is something that we have to correct. That's why, even though you said it has to be, published by February, in fact, day before yesterday, on 14th, in fact, 2 days ago, we published that. It has now been gazetted. You can check it, the Public Finance Management Bill. In fact, that I consider is one of the landmark bills in Sri Lanka when it's come to the fiscal management. In fact, Doctor, you may remember that in the past, previous program also, we tried to get this done. But at least now we have been able to, complete the, work that, finish in halfway. And now it has been gazetted, and it will be taken very soon in the Parliament. So everyone will get a chance to basically look at it and give their comments and basically deliberate. And I really, encourage everyone to, give their views on that, because this is one of the, like the Central Bank Act, to me, this is one of the key legal, piece of, paper, and also the act that would be, going to the Parliament and would be approved. We hope that it will, and once it is approved, that would provide the, necessary guidelines, the framework, and the, guidance to go forward, particularly the legal framework that would basically, lock the, hard-earned gains, if I say like that, in a legal framework, so that, whoever who is going to come into the power would not be easy to basically change that. We have experienced the Fiscal Management Responsibility Act, which was, I think, introduced in 2003. In fact, although they had some, targets, those were not binding, and there were no some specific, considerations and specific requirements. If a target is, breached, what the government had to do is that, go to the Parliament and explain it why it was breached. But there was no some remedial actions. But in this new act, there will be no new remedial actions to be, introduced. We want to basically to correct that situation. That is one of the key areas. And also, we will be basically repealing this FMRA bill with the new PFM bill, and mainly, there will be some fiscal rules, basically the primary balance target, and at the same time primary expenditure targets, which is going to be 13%, and there will be some other specific areas, and also the requirement which were there under the FMRA to basically, improve the transparency. For example, publications, various, budgetary position report, NDA report, and mid-year fiscal position report, and at the same time the sort of, budget position report or something like that. All those, reporting requirement will also be there. And then there will be some other specific, provisions to, ensure that the budget preparation, execution, and monitoring will be, taken place in a framework. And also, as I saw in the presentation, and there will be some, specific, committees established to basically look into the public investment program. And then public investment committee established. There will be revenue committee, cash flow management committee. The sort of, committees would be there to basically ensure that whatever the, things that we are doing would be, done systematically and formally going forward. And those things would have to be adhered by whoever is going to come to the positions and also to the government. So that is my basically expectation. And at the same time, I would like to make this request from you as well. Having laws alone would not, give the, expected benefits. It is the commitment to implement these sort of, laws that needs strong, commitment. At the same time, the pressures from the social groups, for example, the private sector, the investors, the general public, and whoever, journalists, and everyone, and also it is the responsibility of the parliament and the members of parliament, the cabinet, and the leadership of the government who is going to come in the future to basically to adhere to this target. These have been, basically introduced in good faith, and there will be a lot of, as I mentioned, room to discuss and make whatever the corrections to be, done to basically get a, much more suitable, very good law into the country. So once it is approved, I think it is the duty of the people and as I mentioned, the segments of the society and the stakeholders to ensure that law is implemented as we expect. Otherwise, I would basically warn again, if you are not going to do that, I would like to warn you, if you are not going to basically manage the fiscal in a disciplined manner, we are going to go to the same place what we were in 2022, or maybe it could be worse than that. So with that, I think I will stop my.
So there we had a very serious warning from ST on what could happen if you don't maintain the targets set under this Public Financial Management Act. So Harsha, I'll just like to move to you. You've heard the provisions, and I think now we can actually see the bill. But you have been in Parliament and you have brought this up many times. We've had this Fiscal Management Responsibility Act from 2003, so over 20 years. And we know that consecutive governments, we have seen violations of the targets that have been set in terms of budget deficits or moving targets, in a sense, on public debt, etc. So how, and there have been no consequences for any government that has violated it. Now, ST says that there are going to be provisions brought in to address these, but what do you think it will take to ensure governments stick to these targets that are proposed in this act?
Yeah, so that's really the thing, because we objected to this budget being approved in violation of the Fiscal Management Responsibility Act, because even this budget for 2024 had to be below 5%, but it is not. So when I was very vociferous and I told the speaker, look, we cannot break the law knowing we are breaking the law. So why don't you at least bring an amendment to the law so that we are not breaking the law, right? But the government unfortunately did not want to listen to us. My colleague here, Iran, also made a major attempt to try to get the lawmakers to abide by the law, but it didn't happen. So what happens to all of us who broke the law? It's not binding. What does it mean? Broken promises of FMRA since 2003. Deficit was supposed to be 5% by 2006. Governments continued to ignore. Debt was supposed to be 60% by 2016. Governments continued to ignore. guarantees given by the government was supposed to be 5% or something like that of GDP, and now it's gone to like 20% or something like that, right? And then we are bankrupt, right? And then people sort of, and like I appreciate what he said, if it is our fiscal indiscipline, right? So if we continue to break promises that we make to ourselves, we will end up in the same place. So how do we keep, officials, politicians accountable? Okay, you send them home, but somebody else will have to come to office and fix it. And ultimately the people suffer, right? So it is about holding these people accountable. There is no accountability, right? So this is not sort of corruption in the way that we refer to corruption. But the reason why we are in this mess is simply this. So I think bringing the Public Finance Management Act is a really good thing, because currently it's all fragmented. So therefore we need cohesion, right? So if we can bring everything together, a comprehensive law, and it has the teeth it needs to have to make people accountable, then I think it will have some hope of success. Another thing is, I think, it's bringing the public debt management office and the debt management law. Now it comes to our committee on Tuesday, right? So I think with the Public Finance Management Act, the debt management law, the public debt management office, all of that put together, I think we'll have hopefully a comprehensive mechanism to bring discipline in fiscal affairs. Another point I want to make is that we need to try and engage civil society, engage the public in what's going on, right? For instance, the English press, to an extent, I think is able to go into matters, serious matters to some extent, right? But the Sinhala press, I'm not sure about the Tamil press because I can't read Tamil, is almost ignorant of what's happening. If you open the widely read Sinhala newspapers or television news in Sinhala, what is the depth that we go into in understanding, unpacking the real issues that we are facing? It is easy to highlight some small thing and write pages, and even in social media you will see so much conversation about some little thing. It's easy to pick some little thing somewhere and go after these people, etc. But the discussion on deep matters of important matters is almost not available. I see Dr. Patumkane here. I see how much effort he is trying to sort of get into that type of discussion in social media. I don't know how much engagement you have, but that is the kind of thing we need. So bring people in. And one last comment is, because we open now the committee to the public. I just give you one example. The micro microfinance bill was brought. We opened it to civil society. We asked people to come and participate and air their views. This went out, and lots of people started writing to the committee on matters they thought were not covered by the act, or rather the bill. And the ministry withdrew the bill. I think it's the first time it has happened, because there was conversation, discussion around it. And now the ministry has said, well, we are going to come up with a brand new microfinance bill. So there needs to be that engagement. So that's my point on that.
Thank you. And Sharmini, I just want to bring you into this conversation on fiscal rules and fiscal councils, and particularly your experience, in the IMF and working with other countries. And I think there's a paper which basically says countries which who have adhered to these fiscal rules, have very good fiscal councils, have had a much better track record in terms of fiscal sustainability. Would you like to comment on that, please? And how Sri Lanka, where does Sri Lanka stand in that?
I think, what the Secretary and Harsha have just said is exactly to the point. There's no impunity, there's no accountability, and that's the core of Sri Lanka's problem. Look, we have gone 17 times to the world's lender of last resort. We have many problems, but the core problem, why? Because our fiscal are not disciplined, and countries, as you say East Asia crisis. These countries, they didn't get into, by the way, this crisis because of fiscal problems. They got into because of banking and other issues. They fixed their institutions after a crisis. It wasn't immediate, but they've largely fixed it. And now look, the pandemic, the global financial crisis. Did you see Thailand coming to the fund for help? Did you see Korea coming to the fund? Right. But we don't. We go back again and again. So countries that have strict rules and good governance, and governance goes beyond corruption. It is about the process of how a country takes decisions on key issues, and how they implement those. If the process is good, that is, it's fair, it's transparent, it's open, as Harsha was describing, then the outcome is likely to be good as well. And so in Sri Lanka, we've got to fix this process. And I totally agree. This bill is key, and adherence to the law and adherence of discipline of parliament is essential.
Thank you, Sharmini. And before I open the floor to questions, I just want to talk about this, pick up from what Sharmini said on transparency, particularly the lack of transparency, really, on the public investment program. And ST, I know, that has really led to several white elephant projects as well as allegations of corruption. To overcome this, the government has committed to enacting a public procurement law, as well as I think there's a structural benchmark for the government to publish all procurement contracts over 1 billion, including publishing the awardees of these contracts. Now that was supposed to be done by December 2023. Again, there's a delay in that. What is the reason for the delay? Because obviously these are ways in which you can improve the governance, fiscal governance particularly. So why the delay? What is the status? And what more needs to be done in terms of improving this public procurement process?
That again is a very, very important question. In fact, National Procurement Commission is in the process of revising the guidelines. Very soon, I think they will basically come up with that. That's my understanding. And at the same time, as you very correctly mentioned, there is a sort of, expectation to come up with the procurement law. It's not a structural benchmark, but we have agreed with that, with the IMF to come up with, I think, before end of this year. That's my expectation, understanding. But at the same time, you are right. There is a commitment to publish this sort of, contracts, rather procurement, above 1 billion. In fact, we have been publishing, about 200 million. We have basically already adhered to that. But the problem is how you basically, remove this human intervention and use the technology, information technology, and improve the processes so that there won't be any, human intervention, at least minimum intervention, so that, ensure that a good procurement, efficient procurement, free of corruption would be taking place. That's where the challenge is. That's why I think the e-government, e-procurement system has been proposed. I saw in the slides as well. In fact, we have already started that process. We have been, successful in, coming up with one segment of the procurement. I think, but we have to come up with a fully fledged system by, I think, end of next year or this year. So we are in that direction. So broadly, the government has, agreed to implement this, and we are on that path. So with these things, we are hopeful that the room to have corruption, at the same time the transparency of these procurements would be enhanced. I just want to make one comment on what Dr. mentioned about the Public Financial Management Bill and also the Public Debt Management Bill and the Central Bank Act. I would like to add one more thing for that, the Economic Transformation Bill, again, which was gazetted on 17th. So that would basically put into the law, to the framework of the agreements that we are having under the debt restructuring and some of the fiscal targets, and also some targets that go beyond the fiscal law, any other targets, for example, reduction of the multidimensional poverty. Sort of things would also be basically, be in a sort of a law in the parliament. Of course, again, like these forthcoming bills, this will also be debated and discussed, and new things would be introduced to the bills. Once it is approved, these four laws would basically create a sort of background and solid sort of foundation for the country to undertake, not only just the fiscal operations, but the entire macroeconomic management operations in a much more, rule-based, much more sustainable manner. And also the point that Sharmini mentioned, Korea is not going to IMF, Japan is not going to IMF. Why? They are living their life. But we, Sri Lanka, has gone 17 times. I think, in my personal view, I think this should be the last time that Sri Lanka goes to the IMF. And end of this program, we should be on our own. Right? And what we have been throughout all of these doing was that, surviving. Right? Whenever we get an issue, we go to the IMF and survive, and then, you're not trying to, implement whatever the policy on a consistent and, committed basis going forward to achieve this, whatever our development targets and also other targets. But at least now we should think as a country to live, not just, on daily basis surviving. So that's where we should go. And I think these, four acts, once is debated and, whatever the, changes or whatever include and approved, that would basically pave the way for the country to, have this sort of, transparent, much more responsible fiscal management going forward. And also it will have a spillover effect on all the other macro variables in the country, so that we can, enhance the stability, and we can solidify the stability, and we can go beyond the stability and basically have a high economic growth going forward.
Thank you, ST. And I'm going to now open the floor for questions. But before I take questions from the floor, I'd like to take one thing that has come on from the online audience. This is Hima Kotalawala says, how do we incentivize governments to overcome the political cost of unpopular fiscal reforms, especially when dealing with a financially illiterate public? And I want to add to that and ask you, Harsha, without political buy-in, it is going to be very difficult to implement these reforms, and for the very reason that was put here. Do you think there is sufficient political buy-in for these fiscal reforms? And how can the government build this buy-in for the reforms?
No, I think that's the really important issue here. I mean, how do we do that? Because reforms are difficult. Roshan is sitting here. I recall something he told me about 15 years ago. Harsha, first best policy you can't get. Second best also, it is hardly possible. Even if you get a third best, go for it. Right? So you can't wait for a perfect solution. So you need to get political buy-in, so you have some give and take. I see my friend Harsha Siriwardena from the NPP. We may not necessarily agree on everything, but I think there is certain agreement that we need certain types of reforms, right? So how do we bring fiscal discipline, right? Everyone has to agree, right? So politics is that, right? How do we make it possible? Right? I mean, we've been able to get bills passed in Parliament, difficult bills. Now, for instance, the Central Bank Act. Right? There isn't across the board support for it. But we know that if the central bank is given the freedom to print money, we will go back to the 70% inflation. It can happen because law cannot be ad hominem. There can be a leader, there can be a secretary, there can be a minister who is good, who is intelligent, who can see far as a vision, right? Is loved by the people. But then that's that person. You have to have a system. And you cannot have a system change as they talk about unless it is sort of legal and it is there to stay. Who is to say that all what we did now, whether we like it or not, what had to happen, who is to say it cannot be reversed tomorrow? I mean, we all are politicians, or I am, and there may be many others here. We want to win elections. Yes, we do. But why do we do politics? Is it just to win the next election by saying something that people want to hear? Why are taxes so high? I'll bring it down. Why is the strictures on the central bank? I'll change it. Why do we want to do these difficult things? I have better solutions. Right? So it is not just for the politicians, but for the people at large in this country to realize, look, we have failed so many times. Why? So I think that really is the issue. Right? So we need to be able to tell the people, we have to get on the same page. Right? One last point on procurement. You can have all kinds of laws, Roshan, right? But look at the procurement that's going on right now. And I can't get the secretary to the ministry and the commissioner general of the department to come to the committee. What is the IMF doing? What is the government doing? What are all these people who say, look, I'm holier than thou, you got to do this. Where are they? Sarvat, I see you there. How can this go on? So one thing is to have it in the books. The other thing is to make sure it happens. And if it doesn't happen, what are the consequences? You can't just say, I'm not coming to the committee. What? So I go to the house and I raise a privilege issue. Then what happens? It goes to the privileges committee. They don't come. And the procurement goes on. Right? So.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up. Yes, please. Can we have a mic in front here?
Everybody likes transparency, but they don't use the transparency. I would recommend to everybody in this room to read something called the Debt Bulletin that is put out by the government. It's very scary. It makes me very frightened for my country. Particularly, the government, the Treasury guaranteed debts that are there, Road Authority, Water Board, even the Kotalavala Defense Hospital has been given 35 billion rupees. I calculated that they'll have to pay like 36 million every month. What is being done about this to get this under control?
Can we take a few questions maybe and then, Yes, go ahead.
Goes back to something that the panelists talked about. 2016-17, the procurement guidelines were updated with a lot of input from a lot of people in the private and public sector. Before inventing the wheel again, okay, one thing we have in the 2006 procurement guidelines is there's nothing on IT, which is a big issue. So 16-17 addressed that issue. A lot of people worked on it very hard. Without reinventing the wheel, why don't we go to the bill that has been gazetted, that is in the table office of Parliament, and try and bring that bill forward first as a procurement guidelines updates. Then let the NPC, if they feel that there's a lacuna in the procurement guidelines, let them then go ahead and make the changes. I mean, why don't we, I mean, for 2 years, sorry, for 7 years, it's been stuck.
Yeah,
in
thank
the
you very
table
much.
office.
Can we get ST to maybe answer that and then go on to the...
Yeah, I will start with the second question. In fact, you're right. I think I'm not sure about this, the already, submitted bill. But anyway, we have appointed a committee to basically look into this, procurement law matter, and they are working on it. And we will certainly look at this. And also the National Procurement Committee would be certainly aware of it. And the most important question is the other one. This is also important, but the other one is also very critical. You're very right. I mean, this is what the situation is right now. In fact, we are trying our best to, prevent these sort of things recurring in the future, because these are some of the legacy issues, because we didn't have these sort of checks and balances and controls in the past. Right? Because of these reasons. You are very right. I mean, the Kotalavala, this thing, has given the 35 billion, yes. Now we are now struggling to basically pay the interest for that, right? And at the same time, the other, guarantees that have been given. That's why we have very specifically, included 7.5% of guarantee limit into the new PFM bill, which you can't basically exceed. And if you are going to exceed, there will be a lot of, repercussions in the sense that, you are not going to, give to any institution which are not having any financial stability. That sort of, checks and balances would be there, and we have the Treasury will have to be very cautious going forward whenever they are going to give these sort of, guarantees going forward. But I fully agree with you. This happened to this country because of the fact that we didn't have this sort of, checks and balances in the past. At least now, as Dr. mentioned, we all have to get together as a country to correct these things. If not, we are going to basically see the continuation of this in the future as well. So the future generation will curse us that in this particular generation, we have not taken adequate measures to correct this, wrong, I'm not saying wrong, but the, the excesses that we saw in the past.
Thank you. I think we have not addressed enough on the tax issue, and I think there are a lot of questions coming up here on Slido on this tax issue, and I just want to quickly bring that up. Basically, we talked about tax administration, but I think the question is, why should we pay taxes when so many people are not paying taxes, and this whole thing of tax incentives. So Sharmini, would you be able to address this issue on, I think the government was supposed to publish the list of all those who have received tax incentives, do a tax expenditure analysis. That has been done. How effective do you think that is? And my second question is in terms of, paying taxes. In Australia, the tax office has a slogan, it is easy to comply, but hard not to. How can we use this whole digital infrastructure and having this unique digital ID, linking it to all bank accounts? I mean, these are simple ways in which you can facilitate tax administration and tax payment. Could you speak to that? Because I think this is one of the major issues that we face in this country.
Thank you. Yes, tax administration and strengthening it is going to take it's challenging, and it's going to need a lot of commitment from the government and support from Parliament, because the basic problem is that we have a tax authority and that is not accountable to the Treasury or to anybody else. So, and this is something that I think again goes to this governance point, right? I mean, I think this SD underlined had the crisis here to deal with, but going forward, we simply have to demand that the SD and whoever the Minister of Finance is at the time have better management of the tax authorities, the 3 tax authorities. I mean, you have to put in really tough management and really committed people, because no institution, we all know, is going to change unless you change the top. The top is what drives change. So this is critical. Now, on the published information, I mean, look, it's not comprehensive in this sense. It doesn't explain a whole lot, right? So I plowed through the websites. I tried to understand, tried to match the numbers. There's very little actual explanation. Now, let me say, it's a very positive thing that the ministry has done by putting the tax expenditure statement out. These are difficult numbers to estimate, so it's kind of approximate, but that's good enough for now. It needs to be improved. How should it be improved? It shouldn't be just a short summary. The purpose of the report should be to help the reader understand what exemptions, what exceptions there are, and how these benefits that are given are add up to a loss in revenue. And it's really not easy to get a handle on exactly how the big picture is derived. That said, what is stunning and people should realize is how big the estimated tax expenditures are. It's a whopping 978 billion. That is about 4% of GDP. I mean, in theory, if we went from today and got 4% of GDP, we would be at 13, 14%. That would be great of GDP in tax revenue. That tells you how big the holes are. Now, the ministry also points out that a lot of this is taken out by VAT exemptions being closed, so that in the future we will not have so many tax exemptions. They won't be that big because of some of the tax. That I looked at BOI because I don't think BOI things are covered, and the BOI tax incentives alone are about, my estimate based on what's on the published website, is about 445 billion in fiscal year 22-23. That's a big number. I mean, it's 1.8% of GDP. It's about 25% of total revenue collected that year. So we should be looking at these numbers and insisting that taxes are collected from people who are can afford to pay, because revenue administration then becomes really critical. So what can we do to strengthen revenue administration? Well, I think the good news is that the IMF program has some commitments on strengthening revenue administration. So you've got several KPIs, key performance sort of indicators. There are commitments to deliver on them. It's a structural benchmark, and there are 7 KPIs. So we should be complying with those, and hopefully the IMF will be very strict and not let us off the hook if we don't comply, because we will indeed get into another debt restructuring and a terrible crisis if we don't collect taxes. As I said, 14% of GDP taxes, that is 5 more percentage points of GDP, is absolutely essential. We can't survive. We don't have debt sustainability otherwise. So KPIs. The other one is to staff IRD properly. I mean, they don't have the skills, they don't have the systems, and I think we should be able to recruit people from, IRD should be made to recruit people from the private sector with the requisite accounting skills, because there is now a high net worth individual unit, a risk management unit. I mean, all these units to be formed, but you need the skill sets, and you need qualified accountants, IT professionals, finance professionals. They're not in the public sector. So you have to really get them from the private sector through pay bonuses, or even if it's legal subcontracting. I mean, this has to be a serious effort. I think so far we've just been tinkering around with the IRT, and the country will get into a serious crisis if we don't fix this. The other thing that we can do is to, as you say, is to digitalize the tax systems. And if you fully operationalize RAMS, the reason this has to be done is if you don't have computerized tax records, IRT really can't do any risk-based auditing, can't really do the data analytics to figure out whether it's to be on top of large taxpayers, that is big companies and high net worth individuals. How can we tax super rich and the rich if we don't know, we don't have connected systems that say what did they purchase, how did they afford what they afford? I mean, the property and the financial system, the financial assets, all of that has to be connected so that the tax authority knows when an individual purchases something or gets paid something. So professionals, doctors, lawyers, they need to be all in the system. Look, in the US, there's something called the Social Security number. If you do a slightest thing, you have to submit a form that is a tax form, and it goes, and your Social Security number has to be registered, and if you get paid, and the tax authority can track you. Now, the US is hardly perfect. There are other countries that are much better at this, and digitalization is what is key to being able to do this. And the final part of strengthening tax administration, I would say, is we need a tax administration law that makes it a crime to bribe or to help anybody evade taxes. Again, in the US, this is you wouldn't dare do it because you will be thrown in jail if you get caught. In Sri Lanka, there is legal appeals. You can do all sorts of things with the system, and this has to stop. We have to have proper prosecution of these cases, and frankly, put people in jail. Because there's no fear of if you don't pay taxes, you won't end up in jail. I mean, there's no fear factor. People in other countries pay their taxes because partly it's nice in Australia. Make it simple. That makes it. You want to give positive carrots to people, make it easy for people to pay their taxes. Digitalization will make it easier. You can have something that you can do on your phone if you want to, right? That's fine. But you've also got to make people put penalties on people if they don't pay. And I think, IRD is overburdened. It has a lot of problems. This is not something we can fix overnight, but we need political commitment from the government and from Parliament to really fix the problems. It can't be left to, whoever the commissioner is or whoever departments. This has to come from the top of the government, and it has to be a strong political will.
Thank you very much. I think we are way over time. Please join me in thanking the panel for an excellent discussion.
Thank you.